The night the first scream was heard, the neighborhood was wrapped in a quiet so still it felt unnatural. Streetlights hummed over empty lawns, and a cold breeze crawled along the pavement like something searching for a way inside. It was the kind of night where nothing should have happened, yet something did, something no one could ever forget. In the middle of Willow Creek stood a house that looked ordinary in every possible way. Fresh white paint, perfectly trimmed bushes, a porch light that never flickered. From the outside, it was the picture of a peaceful life, but inside lived a family fractured by a darkness no one saw coming. A darkness shaped by the woman who was supposed to keep them safe, Elaine Mercer, a mother of two, a volunteer at school events, a face that smiled in photos but never quite reached the eyes. People described her as calm, polite, private, so private, in fact, that no one realized she had been unraveling for years. Not even her own family saw the cracks forming beneath her gentle tone and carefully practiced gestures. Her two children adored her, trusting every word she whispered and every promise she made. Her husband, Daniel, believed he understood her better than anyone, but he didn't. He never noticed how she lingered too long at the window, staring into the dark, how she flinched at sudden sounds, how she catalogued every movement inside the house as if preparing for something no one else knew about. The truth was simple and horrifying. Behind the closed door of the master bedroom, Elaine kept a secret journal. Page after page, she wrote about feeling trapped by motherhood, smothered by responsibility, desperate for escape. She wrote that the only thing standing between her and the life she wanted was the family that depended on her. And she wrote about a plan. The first sign that something was wrong came on a quiet Sunday morning. The children's school sent an automated message saying they had been absent for 3 days. Daniel assumed it was a mistake, but when he asked Elaine, she said she had kept them home because they were sick. He believed her, he always did. But the neighbors noticed something too. The children were no longer playing outside. Elaine rarely left the house. The blinds stayed closed even during daylight. A sense of unease settled over the block like a thin layer of frost. Something felt wrong, but no one could pinpoint exactly what it was. Then came the second case. Hundreds of miles away, in a small desert town, lived a woman named Leora Hale. To the outside world, she was a devoted mother of 3 and an active member of her church. But behind her smile was a mind sharpened by control. For years she had manipulated her children with fear disguised as protection. She convinced them the world outside was poisonous, that strangers would take them, that only she could keep them safe. Her children grew up believing every word, living like prisoners in their own home. Leora's hold on them tightened each year until even her husband began to question her behavior. When he confronted her about it, she wrote a letter to her sister claiming he was dangerous, abusive, a threat to the children. None of it was true, but she delivered the lies with the precision of someone rehearsed in deception. And one night, after a heated argument, her husband vanished. No missing person report. No police investigation. Leora told everyone he had abandoned them. She said he ran off with another woman. People pitied her, believed her, comforted her. But the truth sat buried in the backyard beneath a layer of fresh soil and a flower bed she tended every day as if guarding something sacred. The third case was the most disturbing of all. In a snow-covered rural town lived Marissa Cole, a mother described as warm and protective. She was the kind of woman who baked cookies for the entire class and left supportive notes in her daughter's lunchbox. But grief twisted her soul in ways no one realized. After losing her eldest child in an accident, she became consumed with obsession. She clung to her surviving daughter with suffocating desperation, terrified of losing her too. Over time, that fear mutated into something darker, something controlling, something dangerous. Marissa convinced herself that the world was out to steal her daughter the same way it had stolen her firstborn. So she isolated her, homeschooled her, monitored every move, and when the daughter turned 14 and began craving freedom, friendship, and a life outside the walls of their home, Marissa panicked. She wrote in her private diary that she would rather see her daughter dead than let the world take her away. 3 mothers, 3 different lives, 3 different masks, yet each carried the same chilling seed inside them. A belief that motherhood gave them ownership instead of responsibility, that love meant possession, that the people closest to them were obstacles, not family. The first major break in the unfolding horror came when a concerned neighbor in Willow Creek finally called the police. She reported that she hadn't seen the Mercer children in weeks. When officers arrived, they noticed the house was too quiet, too still, and Elaine's expression when she greeted them was unnaturally calm, as if she had been expecting them. They searched the house, moving room by room, and when an officer opened the door to the basement, he froze. The smell hit him first: dampness, chemicals, something worse beneath it. A single light bulb flickered above a small mattress on the floor. Shackles, torn blankets, a child's shoe, but no children. Elaine stood behind the officer with a blank expression, as if witnessing someone else's home. Her face held no fear, no panic, no guilt, only the eerie emptiness of someone who had already accepted whatever was coming next. In the desert town, Leora Hale's story unraveled when a distant relative stumbled upon an old voicemail from her missing husband. He sounded frightened. He said he didn't feel safe, and then the recording cut off with a sound like a struggle. The relative turned the voicemail over to the police. Within days, detectives arrived at Leora's home. She welcomed them with tea and a rehearsed sadness, but as they questioned her, her children hovered behind her like silent shadows, their eyes hollow and lifeless. A detective noticed the mismatched soil in the backyard, and in the snowy countryside, a school counselor grew concerned when Marissa's teenage daughter stopped responding to emails. Days turned into weeks. Then the counselor found a message the girl had written but never sent. In it, she said she was afraid of her mother, that she wanted to run away, that she believed something terrible was going to happen. The counselor forwarded the message to authorities. By the time investigators reached the Cole residence, snow had swallowed every footprint except one, a faint trail leading around the house toward the woods. What they found, there was only the beginning. Across 3 different states, 3 investigations ignited on the same week, 3 mothers under suspicion, 3 stories that would soon collide in a documentary meant to expose the darkest side of motherhood. And as the first officers stepped deeper into each case, a chilling pattern began to emerge. Something connected these women, something unthinkable, and the world was about to learn the truth. The moment investigators stepped onto each crime scene, an unsettling thread pulled their cases closer, tightening like a noose. 3 different states, 3 different families shattered by the same monstrous force hidden behind the mask of motherhood. And the deeper they dug, the more each discovery twisted the narrative into something darker and far more deliberate. In Willow Creek, officers stood in the basement staring at the empty mattress where the Mercer children should have been. The shackles gleamed under the weak light, each metal cuff lined with scratches, small scratches, child-sized, the kind made by tiny fingernails desperately trying to claw their way out. It was the kind of detail that burrowed under the skin and stayed there. Elaine Mercer was taken into custody for questioning. She walked calmly, almost gracefully, as if this had all been rehearsed in her mind countless times before. She didn't cry. She didn't protest. She didn't ask about her missing children. Instead, she stared forward with the vacant serenity of someone who had already detached from the world. Detectives began combing through her journals. What they found sent a ripple of dread through the entire precinct. In page after page, Elaine wrote about freedom, deserved freedom, earned freedom. She believed her family was suffocating her, dragging her into a life she never wanted. And in one chilling entry at the very end, She wrote that the children would soon be with peace, and she would finally have silence, but there were no bodies in the house, no blood, no signs of a struggle, just emptiness. As investigators searched the woods, scanned the lakes, and checked nearby hospitals, the question echoed in every direction. Where were the children, and would they be found alive? Meanwhile, in the desert heat surrounding Leora Hale's home, detectives peeled back the layers of her carefully engineered lies. The voicemail from her missing husband was the key that cracked the surface, but the truth buried beneath her flower bed was what blew the case open. When officers dug into the soil, they found what they feared: human remains wrapped in the same type of tarp stored in Leora's garage. The body showed signs of blunt force trauma, and based on decomposition, investigators estimated he had been there for nearly 2 years. As forensic teams swarmed the yard, Leora watched through the window with an expression that didn't match the moment. She didn't appear guilty or panicked, not even surprised. Her face reflected something else entirely: relief. Inside the house, a search revealed notebooks filled with strict routines for the children, rules for waking, eating, sleeping, even rules on what they were allowed to think. The children had lived under psychological captivity, conditioned to obey her every word. When questioned, they answered mechanically, as if repeating lines drilled into them for years. Detectives realized the real prison wasn't the house. It was their mother. The third investigation, buried beneath heavy snowfall, spiraled into chaos the moment officers stepped onto the Cole property. The trail of footprints leading into the woods was thin, almost erased by drifting snow, but it was enough to pull them deeper beneath the trees. Half a mile in, they found a torn piece of fabric frozen into the ice. It was from the daughter's jacket. A few yards farther, they discovered scattered pages from Marissa's grief journal, blown by the wind. The entries revealed a disturbing transformation from mourning into obsession. She wrote that the world had taken her first child, and she would not allow it to steal the second. One heartbreaking line stood out: "If I let her go, I lose her forever. Better to keep her close even in death." The search intensified. Drones swept above the forest. Volunteers marched through the snow with flashlights. Officers shouted her name into the cold wilderness, each call fading into the distance like a plea swallowed by the earth. Hours passed. Then a deputy noticed something near the frozen creek, a set of footprints in the snow, small, fragile, leading toward the icy water, and beside them another set, larger, adult-sized. The trail stopped abruptly at the creek's edge, where the ice had cracked inwards as if something heavy had broken through. Back in Willow Creek, investigators uncovered the first major twist in the Mercer case. CCTV footage showed Elaine sneaking out of the house late at night, carrying something heavy inside trash bags, not once, not twice, but over 8 separate nights. Footage showed her driving toward the abandoned quarry outside town. Inside her car, police found traces of rope fibers that matched the bindings in the basement. In the trunk, they discovered dried mud identical to the quarry's terrain. Every new detail made the truth more unavoidable. Elaine had moved something from the house, and she had done it alone. At the desert crime scene, another breakthrough surfaced. Leora's financial records revealed massive life insurance policies taken out on her husband the year before he died. Policies she cashed out shortly after his disappearance. Money she used to renovate the house, take expensive trips, and maintain the illusion of a thriving family. Her motive wasn't fear. It was greed and control. Her children, still terrified to speak freely, began hinting at deceptions layered deeper than anyone expected. They mentioned late-night noises, whispers through the walls, their father begging for help. The picture forming was horrifying. He had not been murdered quickly. He had suffered. Back in the snow-covered woods, the search for Marissa's daughter reached a critical turning point. Just as rescuers prepared to widen the perimeter, they found something tucked between two rocks. A glove, a child's glove. Inside it, still warm, was a pulse, faint but alive, and beneath a thin layer of snow the girl lay half. Conscious, trembling, her lips blue. She had survived, barely. Her first whispered words shattered everyone around her. She said her mother had dragged her toward the creek, that she fought back, that the ice cracked beneath them, and she managed to crawl away while her mother slipped. She said her mother didn't come back up. As dawn broke across 3 separate states, detectives realized they were dealing with more than isolated crimes. Each case mirrored the others in its own twisted way. 3 mothers breaking under the weight of obsession. 3 families destroyed by the hands meant to protect them. And then another revelation emerged, something that tied them together. In Elaine Mercer's journals, researchers found newspaper clippings of Leora Hale's old charity photos. In Leora's house, detectives found a book written by a grief counselor who had once treated Marissa Cole. And in Marissa's belongings, tucked inside a worn scrapbook, was an article about Elaine's volunteer group. 3 women who claimed they never knew one another. But the evidence said otherwise. They had crossed paths. They had studied each other. They had learned from one another. The question now was chilling. Had they acted alone, or had they inspired each other's crimes? The answer was about to erupt in Chapter 3. The moment investigators realized all 3 mothers had crossed paths, something shifted in the investigation. The cases were no longer isolated tragedies. They were pieces of a larger, more sinister pattern. And the truth, once uncovered, would strike with the force of a moral reckoning long overdue. Detectives began retracing the timeline, searching for any point where Elaine Mercer, Leora Hale, and Marissa Cole could have been in the same place at the same time. What they found was chilling in its simplicity: a single grief retreat, 3 years earlier, a weekend designed to help struggling mothers cope with emotional burdens. Elaine attended seeking escape from the pressures she blamed on her family. Leora attended under the guise of burnout, but carried her obsession with control like a shadow. Marissa attended after the death of her first child, desperate for guidance. For 3 days, the women shared the same lodging, the same group sessions, the same confessions whispered in dimly lit rooms. They sat next to one another during workshops. They discussed motherhood, fear, and grief. And in that fragile environment, their darkest thoughts were validated instead of confronted. Detectives pieced together that the retreat leader had encouraged participants to express suppressed feelings. The women who came for healing ended up feeding on each other's trauma. Each left believing her most unsettling impulses were normal, justified, understandable. They weren't a pact, but they were a spark for each other's unraveling. Each woman went home carrying not comfort, but permission to step into her own darkness. As investigators connected the timeline, they prepared for the final steps of justice. In Willow Creek, search teams descended upon the quarry. The descent was steep, the terrain sharp and unstable, and the air heavy with a smell that left officers uneasy. The closer they moved, the clearer it became that this place held the truth Elaine wanted hidden. On the 3rd day, a diver surfaced with a grim expression. In the murky water beneath the cliff, they had found a small shoe. Hours later, the bodies of the 2 Mercer children were recovered. Their final moments were quiet. No signs of struggle, no signs of violence, only sedatives in their systems. Elaine had put them to sleep peacefully before disposing of them. Her final journal entry confirmed the motive. She wanted silence. Absolute silence. When detectives confronted her with the evidence, Elaine didn't deny it. She simply stared at the wall, emotionless. But inside the courtroom, when the children's photos were displayed, her expression cracked for the first time. Not with guilt, not with remorse, with annoyance, as if the world had interrupted her peace once again. The judge sentenced her to life without the possibility of parole. The courtroom doors closed with a final thud that echoed like the last breath of her freedom. In the desert, Leora Hale's reckoning unfolded with even sharper brutality. Her children, after days of psychological evaluation, finally began speaking the truth. Away from her presence, their memories spilled out like trapped birds escaping a cage. They spoke of nights when their father begged for mercy, nights when Leora locked them in their rooms so they wouldn't hear. They described how she manipulated every corner of their lives, stripping them of identity and free will. She had turned motherhood into tyranny. The prosecution revealed her financial motives, her calculated lies, her strategic isolation of her family. The remains found under the flower bed were confirmed to be her husband. The blunt force trauma matched a hammer in her garage, cleaned meticulously but flawed in its erasure. During her trial, Leora stared at the jury with eyes that carried no warmth. Her face never moved except when she heard her children's statements. Then a flicker of irritation passed across her features. She lost control over them. That was the only thing that bothered her. The verdict was unanimous: first-degree murder, life sentence. As she was led away, her children stood together, holding hands for the first time without fear, a silent rebellion against the woman who tried to break them. In the frozen woods, Marissa Cole's fate arrived with a whisper carried by the winter wind. Her body was recovered from the creek's icy water. The cold had preserved her features, leaving her expression strangely peaceful. Investigators believed she slipped beneath the ice while pulling her daughter toward the edge. Her death wasn't justice delivered by the court. It was justice delivered by fate. Her daughter, recovering in the hospital, finally began speaking about the weeks leading up to the incident. She described her mother's obsession, the fear that grew inside the house. The night her mother whispered to her that no one could protect her like she could, not even life itself. The girl survived because she fought back, because something inside her refused to surrender to the darkness that consumed her mother. Her father, broken but relieved, vowed to rebuild their lives far from the shadows of that snowy town. As investigators closed each case, the connection between the three mothers lingered like a stain that wouldn't wash away. The retreat had not created killers, but it had triggered something dormant in women already on the edge. What remained was a question that haunted everyone involved. Why did three women from three different worlds fall into the same abyss? Experts studied their histories and reached a chilling conclusion. They were driven not by love but by fractured identities, not by devotion but by ownership, not by motherhood but by obsession. Each woman believed she deserved control over life and death. The justice delivered in courtrooms and by fate brought closure, but not comfort. These weren't stories of monsters lurking in the dark. They were stories of human beings twisted until they broke, and the victims were the ones who trusted them the most. Months later, a documentary team visited each site, piecing together the tragedies for the world to see. They interviewed detectives, neighbors, survivors. They filmed the quarry, the desert flower bed, the frozen creek. And as the final cut played on screen, a narrator delivered the final line: "Sometimes the most dangerous place for a child is not outside the home, but in the arms of the person meant to protect them." And just like that, the story faded into darkness. The last shot lingered on three photographs, three mothers, three crimes, three lessons written in blood and consequence. Evil does not always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from those who say they love you most.